there's a bridge. Cisco, the bridge to possible.
Hi, and welcome to today's webinar, where I am joined by two esteemed gentlemen. On my left-hand side, I'm joined by the VP IoT and Telecommunications of IDC, Hugh Uhazi. Welcome. As well as Davin Gibb, who's the Director for Enterprise Sales with Cisco. Myself, I'm the Regional Manager for SD-WAN, sales across APJC, and today we'll be talking about the best practices for a multi-cloud era in SD-WAN. Moving forward to our agenda for today, three main things that we'll be covering. First, I'll hand over to Hugh, who will talk about some of the trends that he's seeing in the SD-WAN market from an IDC perspective. We'll talk a little bit about our approach and specifically some of the use cases that we have with regards to Cisco's SD-WAN. And we'll be taking some questions and answers, which, by the way, reminds me, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them online. And we'll see how many we can cover at the end of the session. But without further ado, Hugh, I'd like to hand it over to you, sir.
Great. Thanks, Danny, and good hello to everyone, and thanks for joining us again. SD-WAN has been a real topic for the last couple of years, and it's started to come into its own in the last 18 to 24 months. We've seen early adopters jump on board, and we've seen some of the drivers coming from the market that's pushing people towards realizing an SD-WAN strategy. And some of those are really driven by the move to cloud. Workloads are coming out of the on-prem data centers. We're seeing not only enterprises choosing to take a cloud-first strategy, but also developers and providers of applications deploying their solutions in the cloud as their first choice. People like Oracle, SAP, Salesforce.com for many years, and many, many more are covering the gamut of these cloud-deployed solutions. One of the things we're seeing as a consequence of that is that the network itself changes from being very much a hub-and-spoke type deployment with direct internet access coming from that hub location or a small number of hub locations to really needing to have direct internet access pretty much everywhere. The secondary thing driving that, of course, is mobility. The latest situation with the COVID-19 virus has changed the way that people are looking at working. We've seen schools, we've seen enterprises, we've seen factories moving towards a remote worker model because they've been forced to. We believe that that particular trend is only going to accelerate as we try to have increased levels of mobility and people, customers, employees, and partners move to where their customers are. So that changes the landscape, and we have to look at it. And our customers, the enterprises we talk to, are saying, it's not just one solution anymore for our networking choices. Used to be that I would go to my carrier, I'd go and ask them for connectivity solutions. They'd give me MPLS, a lease line between here and there, and it was pretty much straightforward. With the advent of software-defined WAN, we have a variety of different players. Everybody from the big network providers, VMware's in there, Nokia's in there, obviously Cisco is in there, but also smaller pure-play SD-WAN providers who have either maintained independence, as in Versa, or been acquired by those larger network providers. So the landscape is quite complicated and extensive. So even some of our security players like Fortinet, Citrix, and Barracuda are offering SD-WAN solutions. And then there's, even at the most extreme level, cloud providers and hosting providers like Alibaba and Equinix who are starting to offer their own. So the big question we get is, how do we choose the best solution to deploy SD-WAN in our environment? One of the things we're looking at in our forecast is that there's the importance of a broad ecosystem of capability. So we're not just providing the overlay capability, but we're also providing workload understanding. Security is critically important, and ease of management and integration with automation are all key points. So those points, 32% of the people that we surveyed, about 1,200 enterprises in the region, 907 enterprises in the region, said that cost optimization was their most important criteria. Now, note that they're not saying cost reduction. They're saying optimization, because we're expecting that there's only going to be a minor change in overall network spend, but by liberating some of the spend that we were previously allocating to support branch locations and breakout to the cloud, we're now going to try and solve other problems in the network. So optimizing our network management cost and optimizing our use of bandwidth. So many of the SD-WAN solutions out there give us some visibility to which particular workloads are demanding access to the WAN. So are we spending more time on video conferencing in our SAP environment, or are we actually chewing up resource as people watch YouTube videos? So balancing that gives us the ability to apply policy and make decisions about how we use the network. Security and deployment are really, really important. I want to respond with the network to the demands of the business. So I want to be moving at the speed of business outcomes. I don't want to be waiting, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, or 20 weeks to deploy new connectivity. So many of these criteria are coming into play as we look at the solutions we want to build. As I mentioned earlier, the landscape is quite complex, but at the moment, Cisco is really driving the overall lead. And a lot of that lead is coming out of BFSI and manufacturing. We're seeing other players coming into the market, VMware, Silver Peak, Fortinet, and others. But you've also noticed that 25% of the market is still very much the small players. So there are small specialists who are operating. Telcos are becoming more active in offering a range of solutions and making those solutions not only enterprise friendly but industry friendly is very, very important. So across this region, we're seeing obviously ANZ, Greater China and Korea all adopting large swaths of SD-WAN from the Tier 1 providers. The roadmap to actually realizing value is an interesting one. We're seeing transitions where the first use case or the first justification for SD-WAN is to manage cost, right? Network cost is high, I want to reduce it. SD-WAN may well be the way forward. The next thing though, as we start to implement SD-WAN and get greater visibility into the network, is the reduction in complexity. As I can see more, so I can manage more better, right? I want to be able to see what's going on in the core. I want to see what workloads are being deployed. And then as I move through that reduction in complexity and the optimization of cost, I start to look at analytics applied over my network traffic. I start to have greater control, and I start to have more ability to deploy solutions in a very flexible manner. So that transition is going to be the sort of roadmap you can expect as you embark upon your SD-WAN journey, right? So about 60% of people expected between 5 and 25% of cost savings over their traditional network. Again, as I say, that money is being reinvested in reinforcing the network overall and making it more robust. So as you go forward and you start thinking about an SD-WAN solution, it's really important to get your line of business folks on board, work closely with them to understand what's out there and what's needed. Think about how you source that solution, build a relationship with a vendor who can not only give you the network management side, but also give you the security, the automation and optimization elements, and then consider how you change your development environments, and how you move forward into virtualizing the environment. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Davin to talk about Cisco's approach to SD-WAN.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Thank you for joining us on this webinar for SD-WAN. I really do appreciate IDC's insight and sharing some of the lessons that they've learned. And hopefully, as a customer and partner of Cisco's, you found benefit in some of the roadmaps to deriving business value and how some of the future state value around automation can also help platform your organization into new levels of efficiencies through automation and API integration. So it's not just unique to SD-WAN. Obviously, software-defined X or software-defined networking in general has promised this ability to be able to integrate and really help you in an organization through your DevOps processes to leverage newer efficiencies around automation and management. So with that in mind, what I thought I would like to do is just take through a visualization of what really Hugh has just set up, right? Which is the common transition that pretty much every discussion that we have with customers can really relate to this transition that's taking place. And so, first of all, in case it wasn't bleedingly obvious, applications are moving to the cloud, right? And it's not just one cloud, it's multiple clouds. And so if I could just describe this slide, let's start on the left-hand side. You can see that we are now dealing with a world where our workforce, and you know, Hugh mentioned as well, the remote workforce is also changing. That landscape is extremely dynamic right now, more so now than what it has ever been. But you can see here that no longer do we have to plan a WAN environment for fixed locations of employees and staff that are housed within bricks and mortar locations around the nation or around the globe. Now we have highly mobile users, and now more than ever, as Hugh alluded to. But we also have not just mobile users, but we have very interesting different levels of sophistication in devices. So if we talk about IoT and we talk about cameras and building management systems and card readers, these are quite a large breadth of sophistication and capabilities. And this is something that we need to keep in mind when we talk about securing and being able to mitigate those levels of sophistication across those devices. Some of them may not be able to have a patch for a known vulnerability that's been released. Some of them may take 6 months, depending on the sophistication of the devices. And so when you plan for a wide area network, you have to keep in mind that we're no longer looking to solve for a fixed location branch environment, and we have to be thinking about highly mobile, a wide breadth of IoT devices, along with our traditional use case of campus and branch users. Now, on the right-hand side, that's obviously completely changed the landscape as well. We had traditionally had a fixed head office or an on-premise data center or even a colo data center for some large enterprises. But now we are dealing with a highly hybrid world where it is not just software as a service, it's not just infrastructure as a service, and it's not just fixed data center or head office locations, it's actually all of the above. And so with that in mind, we also need to be thinking about the multitude of peering points that we need to plan for as we want to get visibility for our organization, and we want to have a consistent policy with regards to security and application assurance extended into these multiple cloud environments. Now, with this change of landscape, obviously comes an increase in exposure from a security point of view. And so the important thing, certainly from Cisco's point of view, as we assist our customers and partners on this transition, is that we present not just an SD-WAN solution set, but it's a secure SD-WAN solution set. Because as we move to this highly mobile this highly multi-cloud architecture that we're talking about, the importance to identify the sophistication of the devices and the user, to be able to segment their level of interworking and access into our networking system and our data is so critical. And meanwhile, while this is happening, the eye on the prize is in reducing complexity, because it's something that Hugh has mentioned time and time again in the slides, is that there is a significant unparalleled appetite from our customers, small to multinational large, to reduce complexity. And so the importance that SD-WAN plays here through automation and through the platforms offered through API is really, really important to allow customers to get on board and leverage greater efficiencies that they hadn't seen before when they go to manage their wide area network environment. At a headline level, I mean, Hugh did touch on this, and Danny will be going through use cases that we've had with customers. But if I was to summarize two major benefits that we see from customers almost straight away through adopting SD-WAN, first of all is obviously some TCO savings. And so you can see here in a white paper that we've referred to with IDC, we've surveyed a lot of customers over a forecasted five-year span, and seen the savings in total cost ownership. And I think we really do need to play on, let me reiterate the importance of what Hugh had mentioned before. This is not about telco reduction. This is about efficiencies through spend. And so greater efficiencies are received here by either returning increased bandwidth for the organization, or being able to reduce the time staff members have needed to be able to be involved to make simple things like adds, moves and changes, and being able to turn on new branches or new services. SD-WAN has really allowed customers who have adopted this technology to have greater levels of speed in managing the environment. Now, the other important tenet of business value here is bandwidth improvement. And the great thing here is, given the push to mobility now more than ever, even if it is something that is needed maybe in a medium-term focus, but the ability to be able to get greater efficiencies around the use of bandwidth is something that benefits just about every use case. It's reflected in lower latency application performance. It affects latency and jitter through video connections. It also assists with business critical apps in being able to report POS systems and telemetry data, streaming data. And so really being able to improve bandwidth is one of those wide range affecting business values that actually a lot of different use cases that Danny will talk about can benefit and see additional application speed and scale through this. And so finally, before I pass on to Danny to double click into some of these use cases and verticals, because I think the other thing that's important that Hugh mentioned was different verticals do go after different pillars of value in SD-WAN initially. I think what you'll find, and Hugh alluded to this, is 18 months to 2 years into the deployment, a lot of organizations start to really exploit the value of the platform through automation. So there is some synergies there across all the verticals, but certainly as different verticals go into this SD-WAN transition, they have differing number one, number two top business priorities in mind to lead into it. On the left-hand side of this slide are really four major pillars that we would consider to be consistent in the market for software-defined WAN. And these are really the staple value propositions that you should be seeking as you embark on your digital transformation journey and you re-look at architecting your wide area network. Circuit load balancing and the ability to use multiple simultaneous circuits are a real critical value pillar. And this is so important as the evolution of cellular technology is on us, obviously 5G, but also more capable generations of 4G are upon us. And we see a lot more customers seriously looking at not only cellular technology as a backup, but also as the primary means of connectivity. Direct internet access is a capability to offload a lot of SaaS-based applications out at the edge without needing to impose private WAN circuits like MPLS or IPsec-based circuits that would otherwise all have to aggregate centrally and to then go out direct into the internet. Centralized management and orchestration, I think we talked about that with its ability and its promise to really overall simplify the management. And then finally, lower circuit costs is all about augmenting and strengthening the available bandwidth out of these remote sites by not giving up on our SLA-backed, very business-critical MPLS and commercial-grade links, but also augmenting with additional capabilities and bandwidth and making the right application decision as to which priority would we send that application over which link. But on the right-hand side is really where we at Cisco have been stretching and pushing our value to the market around and extending the base capabilities of SD-WAN into where we are going based on the feedback that we get from our customer, you, and also our partner community. The first area is obviously through our cloud application awareness and also natively extending our SD-WAN overlay private cloud technology into these private cloud and SaaS-based networks with strong partnerships with our SaaS providers. We also, as I mentioned before, we take security extremely seriously at Cisco, and everything that we produce and we bring to market has a very strong foundation in security. And so one of the things that we promote and offer through our SD-WAN technology is the ability to do security and segmentation, because remember, we have the multiple use case destination in mind with our IoT use cases along with our highly mobile users. And also we think about enterprise scale, but also providing you with a platform, a programmable platform, and a community through our DevNet community, which is one of the largest communities in the industry, to enable you and your specialists and the partner community to extend our APIs and to extend into your integration, into your automated systems. And also giving access to the analytics and visibility through this API platform is incredibly important, as well as you bring in that knowledge into other areas of your business through automation. So without further ado, Danny, I'd like to pass over to you to start to talk about some of the use cases that we've had with Cisco's SD-WAN solutions.
Thanks, Davin. And the very first one that I want to bring up is a company based out of Southeast Asia called Grab. You could really compare them to, say, Uber in the rest of the world. So they do ride hailing, they do foods, all of those things. Really dynamic company, been growing massively at a very fast pace. And so with that came really the two needs that that IDC has highlighted as one of the top use cases, which is one, faster deployment, and secondly, really eliminating complexity from IT so that they can focus on other things. And so Kevin, the regional IT manager at Grab, pointed out one really important thing, and it was that, as soon as we had the hardware racked and stacked, they got the network up and running within 24 hours. So if you compare that to how long this would have taken with a traditional network in terms of planning, configuring, deploying, fine-tuning, and so forth, it's a tremendous time difference and a huge gain for Grab. Another thing that I want to point out specifically, and that's what Grab is doing in phase 2, and that really comes to play with where IoT and things like cameras come to play. is that deployment of those cameras and extending things to their mobile device management. So 3 really important outcomes: lightning fast deployment, centralized management, hugely reducing that complexity from IT management. And obviously, all of that leads to a huge increase in terms of user satisfaction. And that sort of brings us to what Davin already talked about, which is this journey of digital transformation. And there's really 4 big pillars that we want to highlight here. And I'll start with the top left one, which is application assurance. And as Davin already pointed out, in terms of reducing the latency that we're seeing on critical applications, specifically when they're cloud or software as a service, and I think the 2 examples that come to mind here are Office 365 or Salesforce.com. It's really assuring that applications like that benefit from the technology, see reduced latency, which is still a big thing in our part of the world, right? That we still deal with large distances. Newton's laws still apply here. We don't have data centers in every part of the region, so this is really important and it's very relevant to our part of the world. We've already touched on intelligent bandwidth utilization, the top right of the screen there, where we start leveraging all of the bandwidth that is available, irrespective of what transport it is on, and really utilizing it in a way that makes sense for the business rather than being a static setup. And I believe it was Hugh who was mentioning that, you cannot start changing things if you don't see it, if you don't control it. And so bottom left, enhanced application visibility allows that control. Once you have that control, you have the metrics, you can start doing forecasting, you can start playing to trends. And this is where AI and machine learning come to play, and we start automating these workloads so that the IT staff doesn't necessarily have to worry about it and start doing things manually. It is happening automatically. And cloud native, wherever you are as a company on your journey to cloud, you probably already have workloads in your cloud or you're planning to have them in the cloud. Stretching our security capabilities and our policies around that to infrastructure as a service, platform as a service is absolutely key and is part of the Cisco offering. With that, I want to talk about a second use case, which is a very large financial institution in Japan, where, as we've already mentioned a couple of times, right, the needs are very different customer per customer. We're seeing generic trends across some of the verticals. Specific for this one in finance, it's been obviously security, right? That's been a big one, and I'll elaborate a little bit more in the next slide. But what we've also seen is a need to protect business critical applications, and you can imagine which those are in a financial construct, from things that we may not always think about, right? Think updates of your antivirus, think about updates on Windows that happen in the background and that we may not actively know about, but that do have an impact on your network. And if we're not factoring in these things, it could easily lead to network brownouts, if not blackouts. So by defining what your business critical applications are, you could really prevent that from happening. And that was one of the major outcomes that Tokyo Marine told us that was an important one. And then a third one I want to point out is really cloud on-ramp, right? I just mentioned it in the previous use case. Any organization has already embarked on that journey or will do so in the very near future, and therefore understanding that will have an impact on how you operate things from a complexity perspective, but also in terms of protecting user experience is absolutely key. And so those were the 3 use cases that we saw with Tokyo Marine in Japan. So talking about security, and we've already mentioned the sprawl that we have in terms of both services and applications that are moving out of our control and therefore introduce potential additional vectors of attack from a security perspective. There's really 4 things that we bring to the table. First of all, our Identity Services Engine, or ICE as we like to call it, that helps to identify devices and users at the edge and immediately start applying the same common policy, the same comprehensive security to those devices and to those users. Second one, to really start segmenting parts of the network so that if a particular side of the network is compromised, it doesn't mean that the entire network is compromised. And this is what's absolutely been key to Tokyo Marine in the previous use case. And obviously we backed this up with some of the acquisitions that Cisco has done over the past couple of years. One of them very namely Talos, where we're bringing onboard umbrella and secure internet gateway, or as we call it, SIG, as part of our subscription. It is entirely embedded into our SD-WAN offering. It is natively part of the offering that we make. And part of that has really allowed us to reduce time to detect threats from many days to a handful of hours. We have a report that we release on an annual basis, and I invite all of you to double click on the report that we have on the bottom of the screen and get some more context on that. The last use case I want to talk about is really a B2B retail group here in Australia, Reese Group, that was primarily looking after a couple of things. A more rapid and swift deployment of branch locations. They have quite a number of them across Australia and New Zealand. They wanted to see management of their network and their IT to be faster, easier. Goes back to the points that we made before, where we want to reduce that complexity so that IT staff has time to work on other things that are less mundane than the network. And one that was really important to Reese was being able to use different underlays as a transport and not having to worry what impact that would have on their user experience or the utilization that they could have with regards to their network, with regards to the prioritization of applications on their network. So that really brings us to what is the business value of Cisco SD-WAN. And I really want to highlight 4 big ones. And again, they're all detailed in a bit more detail in IDC's study. But I'm going to start on the left-hand side, which is a substantial amount of less planned downtime. The ability for SD-WAN to make on-the-fly ad hoc changes on the network by pushing down new policies without really having to do substantial planning or any kind of downtime is really the big change here. Things can be changed, as I said, on the fly, which allows you to cater for things that are either unexpected. It could cater with things such as Black Friday or other seasonal events. It really does change things quite dramatically from a flexibility and agility perspective. In the same train of thought, also dramatically reducing the time to onboard new services, right? Rolling out new applications no longer requires detailed architectural plans or planning. You could literally spin up these applications, and whether they sit in your own data center, whether they sit in the cloud, public or private, it's literally just adding a new service to your overlay, deploying whatever you have in mind, and again, no downtime there. What I really liked about the IDC study, and then what Hugh pointed out, is that we're not necessarily always looking at cost reduction. It is really cost optimization. It is how do we better spend dollars that we already intended on spending, and how do we put it in areas that allow us to either have more bandwidth, allows us to move things into the cloud. Really, how do we maximize our dollars? And so this is where we really see things come together, and where we even see total cost of operations going down substantially over a 5-year period of time. And last but not least, and I think this was the example with Reese, is more efficient WAN management. We've sort of talked about it in the first 2 topics. We dramatically make that easier, and as such, again, we free up resources to spend time on other things. So that, in a nutshell, is what we bring to the table as a business value from a Cisco SD-WAN perspective. I'm doing a quick time check here. Do we still have time for quick Q&A?
Yes, we do. We've got probably 15 minutes that we can probably open up.
Great. Hugh, I believe you've got visibility on some of the questions
coming in. Put my glasses on. one of the big questions that I've been seeing that's been coming in while we've been talking, and I want to throw this over to you, Danny, after those case studies, is how big does an enterprise have to be before SD-WAN makes sense for them to investigate and invest in it?
That's actually a good one, and we get it quite often from our channel landscape that are asking us the same question. You know, what kind of segment should I be aiming my SD-WAN offering to? I think it's an offering that works for any kind of organization. It is really the use case, and we talked about a few that becomes relevant. I think that the second thing that needs to be considered is you know, where are you in this journey of digital transformation? And SD-WAN really becomes an enabler for that, you know, irregardless whether you're 10, 50, 100, or thousands of sites. So yeah, I think short answer, size doesn't really matter. It's the use case and where you're at in that journey.
I think our research would reinforce that particular observation, is as even an enterprise going to Office 365, we did a study not so long ago where we looked at the changes in the network as a result of going from on-prem Exchange to Office 365. And there were engineering changes needed so that you could maximize that user experience of wherever and whenever the end users were.
Just to jump in, I mean, the only other thing I'd add to that is that obviously there's a growth part to this as well. So even though you might be small, SD-WAN as a platform enables you to grow. We see a lot of hyper-growth startups or cloud-native startups that are kind of building with SD-WAN in mind, purely on the basis of it enables them to hyperscale and push out. So there's a growth factor around this as well, especially if you've got some hyper-growth plans.
Okay, so while we're on you for the moment, Davin, there's another question here that I think makes a lot of sense for you to address. So, you know, we're seeing in our research both, you know, do-it-yourself SD-WAN solutions and those through a managed partner like an SI or a service provider. What are you guys seeing? How are your customers taking SD-WAN to market?
Yeah, so I mean that's a fantastic question, and I think to summarise probably what I'm going to talk about for the next 3 or 4 minutes is, but to summarise it, I mean I think we already know the answer, and the reality is that different customers are looking for key business value out of SD-WAN. You know, they place number one and number two differently depending on the vertical. So some of them are absolutely looking for a lot more hands-on. Okay, and so you will see more self-deployment, more local innovation, more in-sourced automation with further platforms within the organisation. You will see some customers and some verticals, given their maturity, might be looking to outsource or looking for a managed service provider to just take care of it, because potentially the transition for them is becoming something that they don't want to take on their own, and they're looking for some leadership in the market through either an SI, like you mentioned, who is also interested to help manage this type of offering, but also from a traditional telco who is obviously well positioned to help manage this on their behalf. And so the reality between an SI and a telco, I think both of them have aspirations to take on more management of the enterprise IT environment. And I think a lot of the SIs come with strength in understanding the breadth of that IT infrastructure out of the branch. They understand, you know, I understand identity as well as applications, as well as common cloud applications, and they can bring that breadth to a solution offering, not just a managed service offering. And obviously the telcos have a unique strength just in investments.
So at that point, I just want to switch back to Danny and say, you know, you alluded to a couple of customers who have been doing this for a while. What are you hearing from them 6 or 12 months in this journey? What are they telling you? And obviously, Davin, you've got some input on this as well.
Well, two things, right? And I mentioned one of them before. It's where are they at, in this digital transformation journey. But more particularly, and I think that's an important lesson learned that I want to share probably with most of the customers on the WebEx here, is nobody goes to bed and wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I'm going to do some SD-WAN, right? It's something that is broken down in a number of phases. And what we see is the use cases that people adopt early on, let's say in the first 3-6 months, tend to focus on how do we cost optimize, right? One of the things that you brought up. Once beyond that, they really start, feeling the benefits that the technology brings them, and they start thinking of things that may not have been on their roadmap at the outset of the project, and they're saying, you know what we're seeing here really allows us to push things into public cloud. Why don't we look at moving some of these workloads? Because now we're assured that SD-WAN takes care of our end user issues. And so what we're seeing is as they go on this journey, hate to use the word again, they're really adding more and more, I would say, workloads, features, value to the SD-WAN, and it becomes really enabler for them to do so.
And just to jump in, I mean, that is the promise of this software-defined networking transition that we're talking about, because this is not just about wide area network transitioning. Obviously, data centers are transitioning, and physical infrastructure out at these branches and these remote locations are also transitioning. And so the capability that SDN provides here is exactly what Danny just spoke about. But I mean, Hugh, just to flip the coin, I'd love to get your thoughts as well.
Well, I think that we are, the software-defined nature of networks is being embedded into the pipes themselves. We've always talked about dumb pipes. We're now getting pipes which can tell us about threats, about the threat landscape, can tell us about workloads, can tell us about traffic volumes, and help us to discover where things are. As we go forward to embrace low-power WAN, cellular, as you mentioned, 5G, even Wi-Fi, right? Which is getting a resurgence with Wi-Fi 6. All of these things broaden that networking landscape we have to deal with. So ease of deployment, flexibility, simplicity are all going to become even greater elements as we use more and more of those protocols. So in the future, the roadmap's going to be everything has to be virtual. It'll lock in closely with our security infrastructure, our cloud infrastructure, and our development and deployment approaches. So I think we're going to see in the future, we'll talk less and less about SD-WAN, and we'll just talk about networking, but in an intelligent sense. And that's what we have to look and build into the early deployments from now on in. So, I mean, where are you guys going? What is Cisco seeing as the next big thing in SD-WAN?
So I'm not, I will highlight obviously the evolution of the cellular technology.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is probably the most near-term visible area of opportunity here. And what I mean by that is, and I kind of alluded to it, I think we all alluded to this, is that the cellular is no longer becoming a nice-to-have backup. It's becoming not only a real-time additive, so you would have an active wired and an active cellular, but it is also, and certainly we see this in Asia, that they are world-leading in their preparation and investment of cellular technology to become a formidable primary circuit and multiple primary circuit. And what I mean by that is a lot of the interfaces that are being developed and are coming out will allow dual SIMs and beyond, and allow this active relationship, not just with one particular tower, but multiple towers to increase those levels of higher availability. And I think there's just a fantastic synergy with SD-WAN, which SD-WAN gives an ability to its adopter to be able to leverage these last mile transitions and technologies at a far lower level of friction than what has ever been before. So it is really easy to add additional circuits into SD-WAN. I mean, we could even use multiple cellular on top of multiple wired, and SD-WAN provides us through the GUI ways in which we can just automatically load balance this out of the box. And so I think a lot more technology that you'll see in SD-WAN will really exploit this. Obviously security, like I can't answer a question like this without suggesting that we will continue to evolve security capabilities. And it's not just in static capabilities around segmentation, but it will be continuing evolutions in identifying the millions of different manufactured devices, whether they're user devices or OT devices with IoT. And then finally, you know, the AI and ML, right? I mean, if that isn't one of the biggest transitions that's taking place globally in digital industries, the ability to leverage AI and ML, not just for forecasting and analysis, but in the security context for that 0 day, because it's that 0 day which I think most people are the most vulnerable to, because there isn't a known identifier for that particular vulnerability, and being able to leverage AI and ML seamlessly into the solution is a major development that you'll see coming down the line with SD-WAN, to be able to, that time to market, that time to identification that Danny spoke about. We have been on a trajectory of monitoring this time to identification for many years now, and you'll see them in the cybersecurity reports slowly as an industry that started to come down from days, you know, almost a year into hours now. And, you know, we will continue to get less and less time to realization and time to threat identification through automation and through AI and ML. Danny, I don't know if there's anything top of mind for you that you can see coming.
Just picking up a little bit on what we're seeing in ASEAN or Southeast Asia with regards to adopting mobile technology. We have a number of banks, particularly in the multi-island nations such as Indonesia and Philippines, that are actively seeking us out, asking us whether mobile data as a primary connectivity can replace VSAT or satellite connections. So, you know, this isn't future. This is now. It is happening now, and it's bringing tremendous not only opportunities but value to the table to be able to use that. So with that, what I'd like to do is share a number of things which you could clearly see on the screen today. A few resources that we'd like to share with you. There's a white paper, there's an ebook, there's an ability for you to go online and request an SD-WAN demo. Please feel free to do that. Feel free to reach out to your Cisco account teams. I'm very happy to have a conversation with you about where you are in your journey to digital transformation and where SD-WAN could fit. I believe with that, we can wrap it up for today. Hugh, thank you so much for joining us. Devin, thank you for having me. And back to the studio.